significance of that?
You call Donald Trump, he's misguided. You say now
he's unstable. He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room. And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
but
is.
You talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand.
In what can only be described as a disastrous interview with Brett Baier on Fox News, Vice President Kamala Harris found herself floundering, unable to coherently defend the Biden administration's record or articulate a clear vision for her own potential presidency. The interview quickly devolved into a showcase of evasion, contradiction, and rehearsed talking points, raising serious questions about Harris's readiness for higher office. From the outset, Harris seemed unprepared for the intensity of Baier's questioning on immigration, a critical issue for voters.
Voters tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Harris's response was not just evasive, it was a textbook example of political deflection.
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
this pattern of dodging direct questions and pivoting to vague platitudes became a hallmark of the entire interview, leaving viewers with little substantive information about Harris's actual policies or plans. When confronted with the human cost of the administration's border policies, Harris's attempt at empathy rang hollow.
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There is no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Her immediate pivot to criticizing Trump instead of addressing the administration's responsibility was a stark display of political opportunism at the expense of genuine concern for the victims' families. Perhaps most alarming were the apparent contradictions in Harris's stance on key issues. When faced with her past support for controversial immigration policies, she attempted to distance herself from her own record.
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again. And
this led to a particularly damning exchange that highlighted Harris's political flip-flopping.
So decriminalizing border crossings, like you said in 2019.
I do not believe in decriminalizing border crossings, and I've not done that as vice president. I will not do that as president.
So these are evolutions that you've had.
No.
Harris's attempt to assert her law enforcement credentials came across as desperate damage control.
I'm the only person who's running for president who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations, from the Sinaloa cartel to the Guadalajara cartel, to people who have trafficked in guns, drugs, and human beings. I have spent a significant part of my career going after people who present a threat to the safety of the American people and cross our border with the intent of doing us harm and cross our border illegally.
The vice president's handling of other contentious issues was equally problematic. When confronted about her support for gender reassignment surgeries for prisoners, Harris resorted to a clumsy whataboutism.
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system.
This response not only failed to address the concern, but also undermined her attempts to differentiate herself from her opponent. Harris's inability to articulate a clear vision for her presidency was perhaps the most glaring weakness of the interview.
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership.
Despite claiming to represent a new generation of leadership, Harris repeatedly fell back on vague, rehearsed talking points about the economy and housing, failing to distinguish herself in any meaningful way from the current administration.
I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing.
Throughout the interview, Harris attempted to paint Trump as a threat to democracy.
He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
However, when confronted with polls showing strong support for her opponent, Harris appeared out of touch with the electorate.
This is an election for President of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
It's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a
so
cakewalk
are they misguided,
for anyone.
the 50?
This response betrayed a fundamental misunderstanding of the political landscape and voter sentiment. The interview's conclusion on foreign policy only served to further highlight Harris's shortcomings. Her surprising identification of Iran as the greatest threat to the U.S. seemed at odds with the administration's actions.
I think there's an obvious one in mind, which is Iran. Iran has American blood on their hands, okay? This attack on Israel, 200 ballistic missiles, what we need to do to ensure that Iran never achieves the ability to be a nuclear power, that is one of my highest priorities.
When challenged on this assessment, Harris once again resorted to deflection.
Let's go back to Donald Trump, who pulled out of a deal that would have actually put Iran in check.
This response not only failed to address the criticism, but also underscored the administration's inability to formulate a coherent foreign policy strategy. As the interview concluded, it was clear that Vice President Harris had not just stumbled, but fallen flat on her face. Her responses raised serious doubts about her competence, consistency, and readiness to lead. Rather than showcasing a strong, capable leader poised to take the reins of the presidency, the interview revealed a politician struggling to reconcile her past positions with her current rhetoric, unable to articulate clear policies, and resorting to rehearsed talking points when faced with tough questions. With the election on the horizon, Harris's performance in this interview may well become a turning point in the campaign, leaving voters to question whether she truly represents the new way forward she claims to offer.